AI will drastically transform all the jobs currently existing on the labor market. True or false?
There's a need for a timeline for this. In the current moment or in the next few years, false. It will not drastically replace all, but some drastically, yes.
Education cannot keep up with the fast technological changes and provide skills needed at the labor market. True or false?
True.
Currently, too many schools are providing outdated education. True or false?
True.
Welcome to the 46th episode of the Skills Factory. And let me introduce you our guest speaker for this episode, David Timis, AI and future work speaker. Welcome, David.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Maria. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. And of course, the topic of the conversation is a never-ending one, and it's AI and its impact on education. So let's start with education. The universal education movement in the early 20th century aimed to make sure that we have people with basic literacy and numeric skills. And the school subjects, everything comes from there from the very beginning. But David, what does it really mean to be an educated person today?
The world we live in today, given its fast pace and technological disruptions, I see education, again, personal view only, as going in an ideal scenario back to its roots. I read quite a bit of philosophy, growing up and throughout my education, and even up to this day, and I had the chance to experience leadership programs as an adult, as a professional, that were based on the Socratic method, which was inspired by the great Socrates and how he taught, amongst others, Alexander the Great, but also a few other philosophers, which is this whole idea of basing learning on discussion and on reading texts that can inspire different views and basing one's education and learning on having discussions with, in some cases, like-minded peers, but maybe in some other cases, and I am living in Brussels, which is a cultural melting pot with people from very different views, which I think it's even more rewarding. But maybe to unpack that answer a bit, so that's, again, an ideal scenario would have more Socratic conversations, but in order to be prepared to have them, I think education should be doubling down on teaching people at the quality level to read and write. And I say at the quality level because we're often taught to read in a forceful way by being recommended, or in some cases compelled to read certain books without choice. At least that was my experience. I know there's still, unfortunately, even though I graduated from formal education some time ago, I have a younger brother. So through him, I know that education hasn't changed that much, and he still is obliged to read books and has little optionality. And I think that's how you kill in somebody the passion for reading, if you don't give him or her any choice, but just sort of standard curriculum of reading. And then when it comes to writing, and this is maybe the key element here, because we often forget that writing is an exercise through which you stay longer with your thoughts, through which you actually in time develop critical thinking. And we live in a time in which we all know misinformation, disinformation are at, especially given their online mediums, are at their all-time high. We obviously had throughout our history misinformation, disinformation, but because or through, or the tools we now use, social media tools, it can spread much more rapidly and with much more dire consequences. So at the same time that we have increasingly capable AI technologies that can spread mis and disinformation, our critical thinking that we develop through writing is under attack, literally, because the latest chatbots that were launched, the latest models, but even the initial ones in November 2022, when ChatGPT launched its first, or OpenAI launched its first ChatGPT version, they have great potential, very much a tech optimist, but the downside, because everything comes with also a downside, is that if you overuse such tools, especially from a young age, to do your written assignments, you will actually not train your key muscle, which is the muscle to write and subsequently to think critical. It was originally said in a Spider-Man movie, great power comes great responsibility. The problem is these technologies give us great power, but when I say us, I also mean minors, children who cannot bear that responsibility and who then depend on their parents or professors to step in, which in some cases is not possible because obviously the new generation, the younger generation, Z, not even Z anymore, I think Alpha and Gamma they're called, who are now starting school, they grew up with their phones. So it's very hard for professors and parents to make sure they use these technologies responsibly, but there's still room for improvement there. Because at the end of the day, you cannot stop progress when it comes to technology, but you can, if you start from an early age, help your child in this case, because that's where I think the bigger risk is. Children are at risk, and I think parents and professors have indeed, unfortunately, this extra responsibility to make sure how they use ChatGPT, their children, is in a way that doesn't actually positions them even in a less strong place in their when they actually have to work, or when they grow up and have to thrive as a independent individual. So it's a shared
Uh,
responsibility, I think.
David, what do you think? Because some countries have started now to restrict the use of devices and the use of social media. We know Australia introduced a ban, France is restricting the use of social media. Do you believe that restricting them will help?
I'm unfortunately not of that belief. I say unfortunately because it would be great. I mean, we both live in the EU, and we're known as the union of regulation. And if everything could be regulated easily, we would be obviously much better off as a union, as a continent. But we're not. We're in this space in which the technologies are developed elsewhere, be it in the US and China, and that the only option we have is regulation or banning. And you gave examples of other, continents. In the case of Australia, banning. Let's be honest. Kids growing up these days, they're so tech savvy. They find ways. They connect through a different server. They find ways to overcome it. And I believe more in educating them as opposed to restricting access, because by restricting, especially at a young age, you want to rebel. You just want to do what your parents and professors tell you not to do if they don't know how to disseminate that message, and they end up finding a way to use the technology. So banning is not the solution. And as a side note, we see this in corporations, because I work a lot in my non full-time job activities. So when I do speaking gigs and presentations, I work with corporates. And there have been quite a few corporations which have restricted the access to ChatGPT, only to their maybe surprise to realize that their employees were still using these technologies from their personal devices, from the comfort of their home, to do the same work-related assignments, which in some cases had delicate information, which, because they were not educated in how to use these technologies, they were more prone to make those mistakes and to upload sensitive documents and so on. So again, this comparison is useful, because if you restrict access to children, they will find a way to use these tools and use them in a not responsible way.
So, in your example, corporates would be responsible to educate
Yeah,
their staff on how to use it.
yeah.
And in case of education, that would be the education system that would be responsible for that.
Indeed, but with the added note of families, parents, of course, because education system, it's obviously you're working with people who are minors, under 18. So there's again a shared responsibility. In the cases of the employees, there's the corporations, of course, and then it also falls down to the employee itself, as an adult, to continuously learn and so on and so forth. But yeah, again, shared responsibility there, but the shareholders or stakeholders change a bit.
David, funny thing is, when we started the topic of AI in this podcast, I was expecting to find quite some experts being very negative or pessimist about AI coming into the world and bringing huge and unmanageable change to the education and job market. I've heard you that you're a tech positive person, no? So I would like to go through three biggest concerns that people used to have about AI disrupting education and jobs. And I would like to hear your opinion. So, fear number one, this is one of the most common concerns, and it's rooted in real changes we've already seen. So, automation and AI are replacing certain jobs, and the fear is that AI will take away millions of jobs.
Yeah, so maybe just to clarify, I'm a tech optimist, but at the same time, I would also equally call myself a tech realist, meaning that I'm in this position that I used to work in the tech sector for 5 years, so I know the incredible potential for good of these technologies. But now I work, my full-time job is in an NGO working with vulnerable people looking for work, which is becoming increasingly more difficult, not just because of automation and AI technologies, but also, because of the broader economy and volatility and so on, and geopolitics and climate change. There's a few different reasons why it's harder maybe than in the past to find jobs, even though there are many options. Those options obviously are not for everybody. They're still restricted to people who have higher education, who had opportunities, and so on. So I'm a tech realist, and with this hat, as well as I'm a tech optimist, I can tell you that my fear is not as much about jobs being displaced, because that will happen, and that's already, I think, a fact. And it happened in the past with automation technologies. What people who are purely just tech optimists, not realists, would say that we've been through this before. Technology destroys jobs, but also creates jobs. My fear here is that it has never happened at such a pace. So I am fearful of what AI can do and will do most likely to labor markets. But my fear is never going to be about not having enough jobs, but rather not having skilled people to do these jobs. because the technology is changing the jobs faster than we can skill people to know how to use these technologies and to actually do their jobs better and more productively. And then some people will be pushed to learn, and if they don't learn, they will be laid off. They will hopefully be provided the opportunity to do so. But again, my fear, and I already see this as a person who delivers prompt engineering trainings, including for corporates, that the technology has moved much faster than even the top companies in the world are able to upskill their own employees, let alone society as a whole. So my fear is one of having a shortage of skilled labor, not of lack of jobs.
Then a question, who's responsible for reskilling? Because we hear a lot of perspectives in this podcast, and some people say it's fully on personal initiative, and some people say, no, come on, the companies should play a bigger role there.
I think it's a mix. So again, we're speaking now, let's say, about adults and employees, not about children. So we're just to focus a bit, the answer. So it's the corporation who should have the moral duty to give somebody the chance to learn before firing him or her, if he or she has already been successful in the company and has this incredible experience. Because, I can take a side note to mention how important it will be to leverage mid-career and older workers for longer, especially given the demographic challenges we have in Europe, Southeast Asia, and North America, to sort of make use of their incredible experience and organizational knowledge. But you make it used by marrying that experience with AI, and that by teaching them how to use these tools. So that's one thing that the company has to step in. Governments could step in as well and should, because I do believe they will play a key role to help the people who are in between jobs for different reasons. Maybe they're in this sort of a mid-career moment of changing trajectories altogether, and they should be provided in some regards some sort of safety net or support, especially if they become long-term unemployed, so 6 months or longer. So then again, second, government. And last but not least, for sure, is the employee or individual himself or herself. And this is one of my key messages in my presentations, is that realistically, yes, the corporation or the employer, even if it's an NGO, should help. Yes, the government should help. But realistically, if we wait for these two stakeholders to help, you might be left behind, realistically, depending on which country you're living in and what's the sort of a governing system, political system, and so on. In most cases, you would be left out if you just wait for somebody else to do it. So it does fall on us individuals to take the first step, because it has never been easier to take the first step. There's so many free resources out there, online resources. So there's, I think, little excuse to just wait. But at the same time, there will be hopefully some more support from the private sector and from governments, because they should step in as well. They cannot just leave it for individuals, because then not everybody will have the chance to thrive in this new age of AI.
David, the World Economic Forum issued in January 2025 a report on the future of jobs. And also, they presented a list of the professions that will be most in demand. And I think out of 10, 9 are related to IT. So would you give an advice to people that are listening to us right now to try to reskill themselves focusing on IT? Or it's a big guess?
Yeah, this is a good question. I often hear it in my presentations, and I have to dissect it a bit, because when you say IT and digital, most people, the general public, would think, okay, I need to be a programmer. And I don't think that's the case. Actually, on the contrary, with generative AI, and I see you're nodding, you probably are very familiar with this, the biggest threat is actually for engineers, for the entry-level ones. So if you're now a coder, just graduating from university, it's still easy in some, obviously, countries to get job, because there's still the big demand for engineers, but that might change in the next 3 to 5 years, I would say, given how generative AI is great to write code, at least at this stage, at the basic level, maybe in the future at a more advanced level. So the world doesn't need, exponentially more engineers in this new paradigm. It actually needs their experienced engineers to know how to leverage these AI tools, and most of them already do, and they're much more productive. Basically, an experienced engineer does now the job of his job, and also the job of 2 other, maybe more junior engineers with the use of AI. So that's what most people think when they hear IT and digital. And I think, no, we don't all have to be engineers. And if you are now studying to be an engineer, a programmer, I would double check if you're doing it for a passion or because it's well paid. Because if it's just for the monetary incentive, I would recommend you to drop it. Because again, you graduate in a field in which is still very competitive. Yes, there's demand, but there's competition. And those who thrive are those who are willing to learn quite consistently how to learn these new models, new large language models, and how to use them efficiently. And that will require a lot of passion and consistent learning. What I think we all need to learn, it's not the IT I just described, is the IT that is the basic IT or the basic digital skills. And when I mention basic digital skills, we're now at a new beginning, meaning that, yes, historically we should hopefully all have learn how to use, Microsoft Outlook, Google tools, and so on. Basically, the mainstream business office suite of, from different companies. But now there's this new paradigm that we all need to learn AI, basic AI. Again, not to program the models ourselves, but how to use ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google Gemini, the different, mainstream chatbots, how to use them both effectively and responsibly. And that will, in my view, should be done. I was going to say would be, but hopefully should be done from an early age. I think that's where education has to change from a primary school level to teach every child how to use these tools effectively, because this is the new ABC. How to use chatbots and prompting them, especially how to ask them the right questions, should be what we all need to learn. So a long answer to your question, but I just wanted to clarify that, there's advanced IT skills and not all of us should follow that path unless we're passionate about it. And there's basic digital skills. And with AI, it's no different from before. We should learn how to use these tools, not necessarily how to program them, but we should all be at least at the basic level educated.
In fact, I think many people on this podcast, I said, it's not that AI will take over your job. It's a person who knows how to use AI will take over your job, right?
Exactly. I'm a firm believer of that. And maybe if I had another more provocative anecdote, which maybe you haven't heard in this podcast, is that it's not even ultimately, it's not another person who knows better how to use AI who will take your job. It's still a manager who might decide to fire you. So why is that important? It's because it's still AI will not take anybody's job. It's still a human's decision of how he or she wants to, at an executive level, decide to use AI. And why I bring this more contentious topic is because I think the fear that some people feel is real of them being disrupted or even displaced from AI, but they should not fear the robot or the AI tool. They should fear just human beings potentially that are maybe not always incentivized to care for their workers before their profits. Because I think that's a very big discussion to have now. And they're in a very difficult position. I empathize with executives when they're now promised the moon with an AI tool that in some cases, in order to be cost effective, has to displace work. So it's very tricky to be an executive. And as a side note, I think HR will play a role that maybe they were bred to play and sort of we all hope they will play. And now it's the time for HR to step up and to be that intermediary between executives who are incentivized and in some cases forced by their shareholders to deploy AI as quickly as possible, employees who are fearful, and HR who has to communicate the change in as much as possible human-centric way.
Because if we speak about corporates, of course, the corporates will look to get more benefits. And inevitably, the AI will be introduced massively into the labor market, but with the consequences of then maybe stepping back and thinking of what did we do and how our workplaces look like, no?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least at this level of development that we currently see with AI, you still need human workers. The real danger is that for a task that might require now 10 humans, you might need maybe just 5 who are AI skilled, AI literate, which is the real risk. And that's why, it's both an individual responsibility. So you're in those 5 to position yourself and to learn, but also the company should make sure that even if those 5 who don't make the cut, I still believe the corporation should find a way, as long as they're willing to learn, to reposition them and to actually use AI to see where those individual skills who maybe haven't learned how to use AI for their current job, but maybe they have transferable skills that could be leveraged in another department. And there's, again, the AI is great at doing this. It's great that, if you feed it information, let's say you feed it the skills of a person and their current job description from the original job ad they applied for, and say, okay, you can actually prompt an AI now and with pretty good results, where can this person, be actually better placed if not in this department? And you hear now, and I've read cases, research from academia who's been, it's been conducted over the past few years of bank tellers being reskilled to become cybersecurity analysts because that's what the bank needed and lacked. They didn't want to fire somebody who's more than qualified, has experience in the organization, because often corporates forget when you fire somebody, you also fire that 10 years of experience in the organization, the cultural experience and so on, and the cultural knowledge. So how can you take a bank teller and make him or her a cybersecurity analyst if that's what you need? And there's ways to do it, powered by AI. You just have to want to do it and to take the longer road, because that's obviously the longer road. The easiest road is to just displace. And that's why I think my message is very clear. There's always a way to make this human focused and human centric, but it will take longer. And it will take humans and managers and executives wanting to do so.
And a bigger effort, of course.
Yeah.
But what about overall, if we look at the job market and jobs, of course, with the help of AI, many jobs will be done quicker. We will require less time, especially on the repetitive tasks. They will be done by AI. What the corporates will do with all the free time?
So another fear I have for the employee in this age of AI is that he or she will actually be just put to do more work in the free time he or she gains by using AI, again, unless the company is of the culture, of the sort of volition to in some way pay back that extra productive worker in another way. And by payback, there's now experiments which are successful. And there's been one in the UK, I think last year or a couple of years ago, about the 4-day work week. Another controversial topic, but if there's one way for employees to benefit from AI and from their long promised productivity boom that will be gained through AI, is by giving them 1 day back. Yes, push them to do more tasks maybe in 4 days, and with the help of AI, they will hopefully be able to do it without as much as a stress as it was pre-generative AI, but give them a day back to relax, to pursue their own interest.
Dear listeners, stay tuned and remember to subscribe to the show on all platforms. Now I would like to come to the second fear or concern that we hear a lot, is that artificial intelligence will negatively impact the academic performance of learners just because it's going to be so easy to cheat, so easy to do the assignments, the homework. And as a consequence, of course, the concerns about credibility of diploma and the quality of education.
Yeah, I think there's never been a better time for academia, for education systems in the world in general to change themselves. Because it's not a matter of, again, banning AI use. Children, adults will find a way. We're human, we're human. That's human nature to find a way. If something, the forbidden fruit, it's, religion teaches us about it. So it will never change, I think. So the way is to do it differently through education, and education is definitely not set up. No, we are still measured by assignments which you write at home. But there's examples of both professors and academic institutions which have changed the way they assess. Yes, it's harder. Yes, you might actually finally have to pay the teacher more to assess everybody through presentations, through dialogue. Actually, in my view, and I'm biased here because I'm a speaker, so of course I would have loved to be assessed only based on how I speak, not based on how I write. Even though I did develop my writing a bit over the years, but yes, I would have preferred presentation assessments over written assignments. I think at the end of the day, even the written assignments can be done in person with the professor supervising it. It will cost more, but I think it's maybe a high time that academia receives more funding to pay professors. And there's examples in the world, which in some cases maybe are literally an island, or examples like Singapore, where professors are paid as much as they actually deserve, which then attracts more quality people to become professors and teachers. And then they're more obviously willing, if they invest the right amounts of money, to change and to be flexible to these transformations which will continue to come. Now we speak about AI. There's a lot of talk in my tech optimist group about quantum, with what quantum computing will do. That could change potentially society much more than AI. Might come in 10 or 20 years. You never know. That's the timeline nowadays. But changes will come. If education remains stuck in the past, they will not be ready. And indeed, they will be forced to ban as opposed to work with the technology.
We call education a Cinderella sector because when the government has to cut, that's the first sector that is getting cut. And in fact, Singapore is an exception that confirms the rule. So how can we convince the policymakers actually to invest big time in education?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. Given the wars we see in different parts of the world, I think most public decision makers or public policy officials will probably indeed do exactly what you described and put the money into defense, and especially in Europe, especially with the new president in the US who will demand it of European countries. I don't indeed see the light in the next 4 to 5 years for education systems in Europe, at least to get more funding, maybe even less funding, which is unfortunate. So to be honest, personally, again, and I think education should really in a sense, scale back to scale forward, meaning that, or to scale back to move forward. But then more importantly, and that's how I add actually to my initial answer, kindle in them a passion for reading. Because again, realistically, uh, we are owners first and foremost of our own continuous learning. And if we develop that passion for reading, and if we all become, at least to some degree, voracious readers,
David, how do you make a kid a passion reader?
I think I've seen, as I said, both from research and from friends, when they're, let's say, 10 years old and maybe they know a bit how to read and they can make some of their own choices. If the school system doesn't allow them to choose, take them with you in a bookstore and empower them, guide them, nudge them to make a choice and find the book that maybe they're really passionate about.
The choice then will come when there is a device and when there is a book. And how do you force this choice to be towards a book and not towards a device?
Personally, I've made my long-awaited transition from books to Kindle over the past 5 years. As much as I still am a big lover of books, and I would still prefer always a book, maybe that's one way to position it. I'm just throwing ideas out there. Okay, you want the tablet to check, I don't know, YouTube or Facebook or TikTok or whatever. Have instead the Kindle to read a book of your choice, and here's a menu of books. So that's maybe one option, to still give them a digital device that maybe they grew up with and are more accustomed to, if the hope for them enjoying a physical book is lost, because it can be the case. And Kindle might be actually a good way. And I've seen it in myself as a voracious reader who loves books. I managed to make the transition, and I've only made it in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So they take me many years to transition to Kindle. And now I couldn't be happier because I couldn't physically carry books with me as much as I wanted. So it's actually quite practical.
Reading and writing are essential, and the education really should focus on these basic skills, and even if they're not so basic, actually. But I would like to talk to you also about the skills for the future.
The three clusters of skills I think we should all strive to develop in ourselves or loved ones. So the first one is people skills, and the people skills are the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. I would add to this maybe a few more. One of them, being curiosity, which is very important, is maybe the foundation for learning, and it's a skill that I hold very dear, which you can develop. You can also be born with a bit of a predilection for it, but you can also develop it. I believe in both nature and nurture. And also empathy, or I would put it as emotional intelligence as being maybe a sixth one, which is not a C, but is very, very important. So those are the people skills. Then we have the digital skills, which we already discussed, a lot about. The advanced ones for those who are passionate and interested, and the basic ones for everybody else, which now should include AI skills. But by AI, I mean how to prompt. Prompt engineering is now a very, I think, relevant skill. And last but not least, which in my view are the most important skills, and we've seen this in the light of COVID and how we each dealt with COVID and with obviously with the loss we had in our lives to some degree at least, which is it was called by a Stanford professor, which also has a great TED talk. Her name is Carol Dweck, growth mindset. So you can call them growth mindset skills or behavioral skills. I use the terms interchangeably. And here I would put resilience, grit, flexibility, perseverance, all these skills that help us to bounce back, to be able to pivot on our feet and not to be solely focused on just one career or one task, because that might change from one week to the other. So people skills, digital skills, and growth mindset skills as clusters, I think they're the perfect recipe, if you want, for what we would need, regardless if you choose to be a nurse, a professor, or an IT, professional. We would all need, to some degree at least, a few of these skills.
Don't you find it extraordinary that in AI age we're living, what will help us to thrive is actually those skills that makes us human, like resilience, like critical thinking. These are really what makes us different from the machines.
Exactly. We cannot really predict what jobs will be in the future, which I totally agree with. We cannot. But all we can predict what skills will still be relevant, because as long as we'll have people in the world, will still appreciate collaboration and creativity. So I think whilst jobs you cannot predict, skills you can. And another thought-provoking question for your audience maybe to think more about, which is maybe a bit contrarian, it's, a tech executive that I followed over the years was asked recently the question that we all are asked for in this AI and future workspace. I often get asked this question: what will change in the next 10 years? And his answer, which I now adapted to myself, is what will not change, because I should focus on that. Because there's still things that will not change. Skills that I mentioned, some of them have been with us for thousands of years. They will still be important. Double down on those skills. Don't focus on just jumping on a new AI tool to learn it to become a programmer unless you're passionate about it, because that might change in 5 years with quantum computing, and you might need to learn a completely different IT language, so to say. God knows what technology and what surprises might come. But doubling down on the skills we know makes us, as you said, rightfully so, human, they will remain with us, at least within our lifetime.
Positive message overall, because we know what to develop, we know what to do. Let's say we're just not sitting there and watching the world collapse, but we can do something about it, no?
Exactly. And indeed, it should start with us, as much as I still believe, I'm very vocal about the need for both corporate and governmental intervention to support people, especially those who are less fortunate than us. But in all cases, at the end of the day, it still depends a lot on the individual. And I do believe,
So you really put the hope on the individual level and of people making the difference.
again, those who will be able to listen to this message will be better positioned. They will be able to thrive, as you said. They will be able to be more faster to learn how to use AI, because if they wait, you know how it is. If you're now an employee and your company, and this has happened to a client of mine, had just bought an AI startup which has a chatbot that is about to be incorporated in the company, who do you think will be the best position? Will it be the person who's waiting for the company to train them in 2 months, or the person who's now doing a Coursera or a Khan Academy course online? Well, the second person who's already learning will be better positioned. So everybody will learn eventually, but those who learn quicker and faster, if they do the reading and writing in school, or if they develop a passion for reading, because that's how it starts, you know. That's why I think these messages are very basic. Some would call them trivial, but I do feel we live in a time in which we need to double down on the few essential things that make us human, and that are, in, again, to quote another famous author, Nassim Taleb, that make us anti-fragile, you know, and having the skills I mentioned make us anti-fragile. And there's multiple other things that do depend on us as individuals to do, not the company, not the government.
Thank you so much for joining us today, David. It was very interesting and positive conversation, which is important these days. And thank to all of you, our listeners, and stay tuned as there is much more to come. Goodbye.